How is intoxication proven in a DUI case? That's our topic on this episode of State Law TV. My guest today is Andy Alpert, a nationally renowned DUI defense lawyer, and he's going to talk with us about this topic. So Andy, thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Andy, how do the police prove intoxication?
They prove intoxication really in two ways, Cindy, for the most part. The first way that you can prove intoxication is through the outward appearance that the person who is the subject of the arrest depicts to the police officer. So the police officer would come into court and testify, I stopped the car because it was weaving all over the roadway or some other reason for the stop. I came into contact with the person. I detected an odor of alcohol about their person. They had red and glassy bloodshot eyes. They had slurred speech. Their face was flush. Any other sort of visual cues that they might see. Then I asked them for their license and their registration, and they fumbled for those license and registration, or they couldn't produce it, or in fact, let's say they produced a credit card instead of a license. And then the police officer might say, now it's time for you to get out of the vehicle to do some field sobriety exercises. They would want to watch the individual getting out of the vehicle to determine whether or not the person was steady on their feet, whether that person could walk back to the rear of the car, and make observations concerning what they would normally associate with someone who's intoxicated under the influence of alcohol. In addition, they then would administer, typically in Maryland, 3 standardized field sobriety exercises. The first one is called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. It's basically an eye test to determine whether or not there's alcohol or any other central nervous system depressant in your system. The second one is the walk and turn test. And the third is the one-leg stand test. They would then evaluate your performance on those 3 tests. They're trained in how to do that, and they would make notes about that. And that's essentially the first way that you can prove someone is intoxicated, because in Maryland, you can prove intoxication, but you don't necessarily need a breath test.
Okay.
The second way that you can prove intoxication in and of itself is by having a breath test. And in Maryland, if you have a 0.08 or greater grams of alcohol per 210 liters of breath in your system within 2 hours from the time that you are stopped or apprehended by the police officer, you are then considered what's called DUI. And you can be DUI just for having that alcohol in your system alone. Most cases attempt to combine both elements. In other words, observations of the police officer combined with the breath test or the blood test, depending upon the circumstances.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Now, does the person that is in the vehicle, do they have a right to refuse these tests?
In Maryland, there is no statutory requirement. That means there's nothing in the law that says you have to comply with the police officer and do field sobriety exercises. So the answer is you don't have to do field sobriety exercises. It gets a lot trickier when you ask questions about whether or not someone has to take a breath test or not. In Maryland, you have the right to refuse a breath test, but you have to understand that there are consequences that come with refusing a breath test in the state of Maryland, or refusing a blood test in the state of Maryland, depending upon the circumstances. And that all gets explained to you at the time when you're taken into custody by the police officer, if the police officer is doing their job the correct way.
Okay, now as an experienced DUI attorney, do you have a recommendation one way or the other as to whether someone should refuse those tests?
I can't make that recommendation because it's so dependent upon the circumstances of each and every individual arrest. You do have the right to consult with an attorney prior to doing any type of a blood or a breath test, as long as you do not interfere in the timely administration of the test.
Well, Andy, if someone has specific questions, how can they reach you?
The best way to reach me is to call my office, which is 301-262-7005. If you should be in that position where you're out on the side of the roadway or you're back at the station and you need to know what to do and you've asked to speak to an attorney, you can call my cell phone, which is 301-775-4572. And if you want further information just in general about DUI and specifically about our firm and how we handle DUI cases, there's two ways to do it. You can go on the internet at andrewalpert.com or Maryland-DUI.com.
Very good. Well, Andy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
This is Cindy Speaker for State Law TV.